go into the background now, the space behind the apple, and get that shaded in, because now I just want to move the drawing forward, and I'm using a 2H, and again just using that modified cross hatching, so this way I can just cover a little bit more area and get a softer stroke going than usually happens with a cross hatch, and get it a little bit smoky. You can cover more area and still get that nice soft coverage that cross hatching offers. So I'm going to go the other direction. I'm building up a little bit more value in this area the same way I did with when I was talking about the shading the table a little down here. And it's because this edge of the wall is a little further away from the light source, so it serves to that it's going to be a little bit darker than the rest of the wall because of that, because it's going to be a little more in shadow than the rest of the wall. I'm going the other direction now. If I feel I get a little too scratchy looking, I go back in and fill in where I had a little too much white left over, so I can get myself a really nice consistent looking background. I don't want my background all splotchy. I want it where I've got that nice good coverage and the value that you can see in an area is because that's the graphite I put in that given area, as opposed to just letting the white of the paper show through. I'm letting the pencil control the value. I got a little too much of a line there, so I'm going back in and loading some graphite here to make that line in there disappear. I'm going to get in here and go a little darker here, load a little more graphite here. Now I'm taking a diagonal motion. Got a little outside there, so I'm going to already clean that up. And sometimes when you clean things up, you can destroy the edge. So I'm going to go back in and just build that edge. So I've got myself a nice edge where I've made my frame. Made a little 8x10 rectangle. So I'm going to load a little more value in here, because this is the edge of a table here, and that drops down into shadow just a little more. It indicates some of the distance between the table and the wall, because my table's not pressed up against my wall, so there's even less light down in that area. Make this a little darker over here, so I've got a little idea of atmosphere and maybe the light curving a little on the surface of that wall back there. Get in here and I'm going to go across here and just load some of that dark value here. Again, separating my background just really nicely from my foreground. This is part of my foreground. It's background to the apple, but foreground to the wall back here. And now I feel like with my 2H, that's about as light as I want to. So I think I'm going to get some better values, because I want to, without doing a lot of pressure, that's about as light as I can get with my number 2H pencil. And I can get lighter, but why should I work that hard when I've got tools that'll help do the job for me. So here we go. I'm going back in with a lighter lead, and I'm going to just darken up that whole surface behind the apple, all of that wall surface here. Get a nice little mid-tone gray going here. So that's getting a little sketchy. I got a little too scratchy in there, so I'm going to fill that in, get rid of some of that scratchy look. And I'm going to be going back in the other direction, so I am using that cross hatching action, and I'm doing one direction first, and then I'm going to turn it around, turn my paper around here, and go back in and do another direction, and that'll help get rid of some of the scratchiness in there to fill in that background, get a little bit more solid. I think what I'm going to do though is I've used the 4H here, and as I mentioned before, I've got lots of supplies, so even though this isn't part of my drawing one kit, since I've got it, I'm going to go ahead and use it to my advantage, because an artist should always use the tools they have. Or you could also just ad-lib too, just, and limit yourself to different tools, and I could do that. And so I'm changing my mind. I'm gonna be in solidarity with my students and use the same supplies that they have, and just be a little more careful with my application of the graphite. I'm going to use a little less pressure, be a little more sensitive, and again, be more in solidarity with my students, so this way they can say, "Oh, well, that's not fair," because I don't want that happening. I'll play by the same rules that I'm giving them. So with that in mind, I know the pencil kit that I assigned them, did it have a 6H? Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, it had 6 pencils, and the darkest one, or the lightest one rather, was a 4H, and that's what I'm using. So see, now I'm going in there and going the other direction, and just still staying really nice and light. And I don't mind going into my apple surface, because for sure all of this here is way darker than the background. So if I go over my apple surface, that's going to be okay, and it allows me to get just a real seamless values all the way down, and it allows me to take my value all the way down into my apple, because I know that when I go back in and refine that edge, I'm going to be shading that apple darker. So I'm going back in and darkening this area. I twisted around just to play around with the angle with the camera, so you can see how that's in there blending with the apple and get a better view of it. So I'm going in here and darkening up that background, so it's giving it a nice little contrast. Part of the reason I chose the composition I chose is because I did want this nice balance of contrast. The lemon's going to get a lot darker still. There's probably the only area that it's a little light is going to be somewhere in here. It's got a little bit of a highlight in here behind that stem. That's the point that's closest to the light. That's a reason you see something as dark or light. It's either because of its natural hue, or if it's all the same color and value, then the reason you wind up seeing things on it darker or lighter is because that's its relative position to the light source. So the closer something is to a light source, the lighter its part is going to look relative to the value of the overall object. So with that being said, now is I'm pretty happy with that background. That looks a little on the, it's got a little too linear looking for me in this side. So I'm going to go in and darken that up just a little because I want to get rid of that idea of that uneven background. So I'm just going in and doing some touch-ups where I feel my background is a little uneven. Again, you don't have to be so slavish to a technique that you jack up your drawing in favor of sticking to the technique. No, you can you can modify things just a little. So that's why I'm going with the side of my pencil more than our book recommends, because again, you don't have to be entirely slavish to a a style if it's not benefiting the drawing. All right, here goes. I'm going in here and I'm going to shade all of this in a deeper tone. I'm going to leave that area I just highlighted. I'm going to leave that one a little lighter because that's where I'm going to have my highlights. And it's okay to follow the contour of your object with your cross-hatching stroke. So I'm going to follow the contour, this vertical contour, and give it that little bit of a conical bend to it, to my strokes, to emphasize the idea of this form being spherical, round. All right, going in there and darkening that up. Again, taking liberties with the idea of cross-hatching. But I'm definitely not blending. You see I haven't used blending stumps or my fingers. I'm just using the action of the pencil to create that value. So that's still a little bit higher in value than I'm interested in my lemon being. I want to drop that down in value. I'm shading with a 4H, and so I'm going to go ahead and go in now with a darker pencil. It's still really nice and light. It's a 2H. So here we go. Going in there and getting that darker, darker. This is really dark in here. This part here almost matches the background, and then there are parts of it that are actually in here that are actually darker than the background. So it gets really tricky when you have values in the foreground and the background really close to each other, and you can lose your edge for a while, but I'll show you how to go back in there and rebuild that edge when I go in the last step of shading here. And the last step of shading is going to be building edge. So I noticed this little zigzaggy kind of pattern down here in the contour of my lemon here, and part of that is because my lemon is a little on the dehydrated side. I bought a big bag of lemons and they lasted me for quite a while, so some of them got a little hard, and so that makes them perfect to use as models for my sketch. So I'm going to go back in here and darken that up still a little more. And I think I still have lots of room to go darker. So I'm not going to mind going into my apple and getting that a little darker while I'm at it. I still want this a little darker. And so you see that's going to give me a lot of room to go back in and make my apple even darker, because my apple, that deep red, is almost black. And then doing the crosshatch, I'm taking this down this direction, I'm gonna go back in here with my eraser and just lighten that area up a little and crosshatch a little into it and see if I can get like a nice little diffused tones by playing around with my values that way. So I want this back here behind here. I want this a little deeper in value, a little darker in value. So I'm going to go in there again, just darker with my number 2H pencil and darken that surface up. Darken that surface up. I'm only going this direction right now. I've got a little bit of reflected light down there, so I'm going to leave that a little on the light side. And let's see, back here I can just go way darker still, and I'm gonna go ahead and go for it now in here with my 2H still and just darken this whole thing up. All of this back here is about this dark. It goes down here and then it zigs back about right here, and that's where that little zigzaggy area I can see in my setup is down here. And I can take this and make it a lot darker again. I'm going to sharpen my pencil because I need more lead. I think now is a good time for me to switch also. I'm going to switch to my B because I'm doing a lot of work here with that 2H. And I'm not getting the dark tones that I want. So I'm going to go back in with my B. I'm sharpening it, so. And then I know I can get a little darker in here. So I'm going to go back in here. And this is what I'm talking about where you can build your edge. So I'm going back in here and getting that just a little darker. And, you know, I don't have to go full on cross-hatching with that. I can just go in there and just play around and get a little bit of lead graphite loaded in there. And I think now I want to get a more satisfying black or a low dark over here on this side of the apple so I can have my contrast of tones starting to build up. And this way it's going to let me know how much room I have to go with my darks in my shadow and my darks in my lemon. I'm going to establish some of these. I'm going in with one of the big boys here. I'm going in with a 6B and really getting some dark work done. And I using something, you know, somewhere between the side and the tip of my pencil is getting me the kind of action that I am looking for here. All right, here we go. I want this to be a little darker in here, so I'm going in here and really loading that nicely. I've got some skippy looking places in there. I can go in here, load that really dark. I'm going in circles a little bit there, and that's okay. I'm going to go in here, establish a really nice crisp line. And you see, even though we're not using outlines, you can establish a really nice crisp border or edge here between the two objects by going in. And again, you see I went into the dark side and established that line there in the dark side, and I can go up in here and get it blended in. And it doesn't wind up looking like I've got my objects all outlined. So this, I'm going to go a little higher here and have this area is where I'm going to go darker. And this is going to be my reflected shadow in here. So I'm going up here, darkening in here, and I've got a nice little area somewhere in here. I'm describing my shadow. I've got like darker areas in here where this is a little bit more in shadow. So I'm going back in and reestablishing that shape that I'm looking for. And okay, so it's doing a little bit of this because I can bury that shape, the outlines in there. You see I'm putting them in sort of in a sketchy type of fashion, and so that way I can not have them overpower my values here. And I know how dark I want to go. I'm going to go as dark as this here. Okay. All right. So there I've got like the shape of my shadow, and you see how it complements the contour of the apple. I'm going to go in here and do some crosshatch shading because I feel like I've got like the nice little boundaries defined where I want that, and so I can feel a lot more comfortable about getting in there and shading and taking it one direction and going back the other direction, staying with that idea of doing a something of a cross contour. It's my idea of a cross contour. So I'm going to go back in now. This whole area in here, I'm going to go in and redefine some of the shapes, because now I'm going to, I can go a lot darker in here and separate that background from the foreground. So I'm separating my apple in the foreground. I'm separating it from my background by going in there and really, and it looks like an outline right now, but that's because I've got a lot of room to go darker in here. So I'm going to be going darker in here and in here and in here. All of this area in here, this is going to be fairly dark in here to describe the core of the apple, where the core is on my apple. So it looks something more like that. This goes up to there. I've got this coming around here. This is a little darker in here, and it comes around here, and I've got like a little light mid-tone area in there, and it gets dark again over here, and I've got some reflected light happening up here, and then down over here it gets dark again, and all back here it's dark. So I'm going to fill this in with a little bit of back and forth crosshatch motion. This goes a cross like this, and all of this winds up being a decent, nice little dark tone here in the back of the apple. So there you see again, building tone, and sometimes you can build tone and edge at the same time. I think that might be about the shape I want to go. I might want to go a little bit more like this, and then I think I might want to go a little flatter in here, and then in through here. This is where it gets dark in here again, down in through here, about right there, about in through here is where it is, where it, looking at my reference, this is where it gets dark in here. I'm looking at where that core dips and where the values change on the surface of my apple. So I'm going to go ahead and get back in here and darken this entire area, because this is just a reflected shadow, so I don't really want it too high in tone and look like it's popping out too far, but I do want to show that it's there. So I'm going back over that in the other direction and going over my dark again. It'll just keep the, just reestablish that tone and even take that tone even darker. So I've got that here. I've got just a lot of room to get darker back here, but I'm going to go in here and put the more details in now for the stem of my lemon. So this is just a really narrow area in here where the stem comes out. The stem is all darker than the white around it, but because it's such a small area, I want to be more controlled with my cross hatching. So I'm going to go in with my 4H because I know I can get pretty dark with a 4H. Just get in there and get dark, and because it's hard, I can control my edges a little better than with the soft pencils, because the soft pencils, they go down soft and they make more of a sketchy type of mark, and I can get more firm marks with a 4H. Now going back in here, I'm just going to put a little detail down in here where I've got a piece of the stem, and it's got a little contour like that, and then in here it shifts and comes around. Down here it's in shadow, so I'm going to fortify that edge down there with the idea of a shadow. And I've got, this does come around and it's nice and darker than the background around it. Then I've got a little shoot that comes out like that. Got a couple shoots that come out, and that gives me a nice little beginning to my stem there. I've got a highlight that's in there, so I'm going to go in there and play with that, highlight it in there, and I'm going to go back in and I'll be lifting a lot of these marks out so they're not competing with the stem for attention. So this way it's lets that stem go in there and be a lot more isolated and have that nice high contrast moment. And again, like I said, I don't have anything in the background now competing for its attention, competing for attention against it rather. So let's see here, I've got a 4H. I know I've got quite a bit of room to go deeper in here on my apple, and I feel pretty comfortable with where my lemon is now. I'm going to be going way deeper with it, but I feel like working my apple now. I got a real appetite for working my apple. So I'm going to go in here and darken all of this up, because even though it is lighter than the rest of the apple, it is still a deep red apple, and deep red comes up on the dark end of the value spectrum as your low darks and your darks and blacks even. So all of this in here is just way darker than what I've got it rendered right now. All of this in here is darker. In here I can tone that down too, because I'm only going to wind up having just one area of a white highlight. And I'm going to take that a different direction and go back in here and do some cross hatching down here and building up all of that value on across the surface of my apple. And remember how we talked about it's okay to do bend your contour lines and conform to the contour of your object that you're drawing. So even in here, you can take that, curve it around, flattens out a little bit in here. So, and all it does is just help reinforce the contours of your object. This I can drop down a lot more. Again, just checking, keep checking my reference. You wind up looking at your reference as much as your drawing. So you're constantly checking your reference, the what's in front of you in your setup. All right, that's getting there. It's getting a lot darker. I'm using a 4H, so I'm gonna go back in with my my 2H. So I'm going across here where I see a part of the reflection, because an apple does have this really shiny surface, so it winds up being very reflective. Going in, darkening all of that up. This comes up here and is dark under over here next to that highlight, and having contrasting values next to each other, that's what helps produce this a sense of a reflective surface. So it helps describe texture. This comes in over here, and all of this down here, all in through here, there's this coarse shadow in here, goes over here. All of this apple behind here and here, and then it comes across here and does this little, so it comes in through here and through here. Got a little Pac-Man kind of look to it. Y'all don't know about Pac-Man. So all of that gets to be nice and darker down there. And then this is going to be a sense of reflected light. So that's going to be reflected down there, and you see how just now it looked dark before because we were looking at relative values, and now it looks sort of light down there because, again, relative values relative to the, let's see, there's dark there, and then this comes down here, and I've got a little edge of, so all of this is darker back here. I'm going to make all of those darker tones. This comes in through here and is a little on the darker side inside of this line. I might wind up moving this over so that way the shapes fit together like a puzzle. Okay, that goes up around like that, and then this comes up around like this and gets darker over here and darker over here, down here, and that's just really giving contour to that apple, reinforcing the contour, getting down here, getting that nice sense of separation where I've got that reflected light coming back in through there. I can go back in and get much darker in here again, just checking my relative values, and I'm going to go back in both directions, go back in this direction, put it in one direction, put it in another direction, hence all that cross contour. I'm going back in now with a B and making this a lot darker in here. So I've got this area in here that I want to make darker. And here we go. So all of this gets to go in and be darker. This whole edge in here, I've got a nice little edge in here. This can go up here. This goes around here and flattens out to describe that particular contour in the apple. Come back up here and put that in there. I've got where it slants down, it does something of an uneven angle there. It breaks up with little contours, but that's the general slope of that angle. This one comes down here, and this might be a little shorter here, so this one probably comes and starts here. And then I've got this general slope of another contour that comes in through here. That's, you know, describing the roundness of that apple. This comes down a little sharper in through here, and then it goes back dark in here, wraps around, and I've got this little contour down here. This comes around and does a little peeky poke out there, and this comes down and it goes a lot more vertical, and that feels like about that shape that I'm looking at. This might be a little lower. I think overall that's okay. This probably is a little longer. This comes up a little higher. So I'm going to take this up a little higher above that shadow line now that I'm looking at their relative positions on a horizontal measurement. I see that this one just comes slightly above that edge of that shadow, and if, yeah. So that looks really good in there. And then I'm going to just go back in and darken up this whole edge again, pull this whole value down, and going over the whole thing with this 2B will take all of this down. It's going to deposit a lot more dark graphite on my paper and take all of these edges down. This looks like it's building up too much of an edge and getting too much of its own identity, so I want to even that out. So it doesn't look like it's a line. So I'm going to take some of that value and put it back up here where it belongs, because this all needs to be the same value. So when that little edge down there got a little too isolated in its value, I needed to bring the rest of that shape up to the same value, up to the same tonal quality, so that way I didn't have like a random edge building in there. All right, so this in here gets darker. I'm going to take a little bit of time and look at that shape. This in here is can go all the way dark, all the way up to here. This goes here, looking at where that opening is. This is about where it gets darker in here, and I've got an area where it goes dark over here, and I get a little light in here. This goes dark up in here almost to here, and take that over a little bit, and this just comes down so that I can have a little bit more darkness there. This comes back up over and goes here. All of this can go darker, all of that can go darker, and I've got where I can go darker here.